Hey guys, I am down to like my last 10 posts for my 100-day project. So I've only got 10 more 3x4 cards to make, and I'm gonna do something a little bit different for those 10 in that I have this huge stash of cards, Project Life cards. I barely use them, never make even remotely a dent into it, especially these ones at the back here, which are all rounded corner cards, which I do not use anymore. Sorry, not sorry. But I do want to find a way to make some sort of use of them. So I have pulled out a bunch, mostly based on this one here, which is some, I think it's from Studio Calico. All of these are super old and not stored by brand, so I literally have no idea what is what. This is like a really kind of thin wood veneer, and I pulled out a whole bunch of other cards, just sort of purely based on that sort of color scheme, blues, greens and neutrals, and I'm gonna alter these cards to make my next 10 3x4 cards. And I figured each day I would attempt to turn the camera on and show you how I do that. I haven't filmed any of the rest of my 100-day project because I'm either doing it super early in the morning or super late at night, or I just want to get it done. Half of them I did in front of the couch, on front of the TV, sorry. So not conducive to filming, but I'm going to make a bit of an effort this week, or for the next 10 days anyway, to film these 10 cards and show you a few ideas for not necessarily how I've done my previous 90 cards, but for how I'm going to alter these 10. So that's where I'm at. I haven't decided what I'm going to do today. I figure I might as well start with this one since that's the one that kicked it all off. So let's get started. So what I want to do is cover up the words field notes. It doesn't really speak to me, it's just what's on there, so I want to try and cover that up somehow. This is going to end up being the first tag in my tag flip, so it makes sense to me to have something relating to first. There's not really a theme to these cards apart from like reusing these older cards, so I'm just going to cover it up. I've grabbed, this was a card that I'd actually made myself with some modeling paste and a stencil, and because that field notes part is like cut through the wood veneer, I'm going to need to cover up the back as well. So I just found another lighter grey coloured card and trimmed the pattern out of that, and to attach those properly I just used my sewing machine, and you can see from the stitches there my sewing machine really fought me going through with a wood veneer and 2 bits of card, one of which has got modelling paste on it. So I did really have to force that through, which probably isn't the best thing for your sewing machine if I'm honest. Now the first thing first card, I just trimmed out the little circle piece from the middle, and I'm going to use some wet glue. I'm using some multi-matte medium to stick that down because I am sticking that onto the front with that bumpy textured stenciled part. So I'm going to just set that aside to dry, and hopefully that will adhere properly to that modelling paste. But I added a couple of sequins to it first because I can't not have sequins in a tag flip, so I'm going to go hard out with that. Now the next day, I just left all this stuff sitting on my desk for the week for these cards. So the card that was on the top here is Show Up and Shine, I really loved, and I just fussy cut that out too, which was a lot easier because it's not a perfect circle, it's just sort of a blobby circle shape. So I just roughly trimmed that out with my scissors and picked this sort of a chevron, I guess, pattern card. I wanted to trim the rounded corners off this, so I've trimmed that down so it's got straight edges, which of course then makes it not a 3x4, so I'm going to just stick it onto a piece of 3x4 white cardstock just to give that some square corners again. And then I'm going to stick this circle piece on top, but I kind of wanted to add a little bit more texture to this card, so I grabbed some gold thread. This is just sewing thread, and I'm going to just bunch it up behind the card. So I'm adding a fair amount of tape runner there, and then just kind of sticking it on. People like Missy Whidden are like brilliant at doing this. As you can see, I am not. I fuss about with it so much, trying to get it in the right place, and I'm adding a little bit more. I don't know the technique to this, clearly, so if you've got any ideas, let me know how I can do this easier. The only thing I do is make sure that I tuck the cut ends back into the card so there's no straggly ends showing. Add a little bit more tape runner on top and stick that down onto the card. And again, I'm going to pull out these, I think they're We Are Memory Keeper sequins. I've got a bunch of different colours, so I'm going to use a few of those on there too. Now again, I'm going to start with a base card, which is just 3x4, and this little sentiment I really loved. That was one of the cards, the one that I cut up for that first piece. And although I loved the pattern, it was the sentiment that I loved, so I did keep it after I trimmed it down. I didn't throw it away. I knew I wanted to use it somewhere else. But it is super skinny, you can see here. So I'm going to cut out a whole bunch of strips of different patterns from different cards. Again, I've got a bunch of these to use up, so I'm not super worried about like wasting them with quote marks around that. My purpose here is to use up as many as possible. So I'm pulling out patterns and colors that I think are going to work well together. And I don't end up using some of these and I end up using others, because although all of these cards I pulled out to work together, some of them are slightly different tones and shades than others. So just randomly trimming out some strips, and I'm gonna roughly place them on the card before I glue them down, but I end up sort of switching things around anyway. Now I'm not sure whether my base card wasn't quite the right size or whether these cards aren't quite 3x4, but you can see when I start sticking them down there's a little edge to the 3x4 base card underneath that sticks out, so I do end up having to trim the whole thing down at the end. I can't even tell you how many tape runners I've gone through in this process, and this one here fought me this whole week. It's I don't know what's wrong with it. I'm going to say it's faulty because I don't generally have trouble with these ones, but it kept coming loose and sort of breaking, and I had to keep popping it open to try and like re-thread it, and it was just a general pain in the butt. So I get down to this far and I decide to place this one at the bottom and then trim down this middle one until it fits, but it's so, I should have just used scissors, but it was so hard to trim that tiny little strip. I ended up trimming another piece off the card, which then wasn't quite the right size, so I then give that another go, and on my third attempt I finally get a strip that fits with the same amount of gap between. I love having that pop of colour in between those cards, the strips, rather than white. I've done that technique a couple of times, but I like the colours behind it. Now this card already had this sort of circle printed in the middle, so I had this idea to use a metal die and cut that circle out. It doesn't fit exactly, it's got a little white line around it, but I'm okay with that. I don't like the colour that's on the back of that card, it's kind of a peachy colour, so I cut both of these cards at the same time so that they would have the circle in the exact same place, and then I'm just using this little piece of, it's just pocket page plastic, and I glued all the way around the circle and then folded the pocket page plastic in half, and then I'm just sprinkling in a few sequins. Now I'm not going too crazy with this because I want it to be sort of as flat as I possibly can get it. Then I'm going back around the circle again with the tape and just trying to make sure all those sequins are flat. There was some that were sort of all stuck together, so I'm just making those all flat and then folding that flap of plastic over, gluing that down really well, making sure it's adhered really well. And before I stick these cards together, I'm just going to trim off some of that excess plastic so that the actual paper of the card sticks together really well. The main purpose is I don't want this plastic to come out or the sequins will go everywhere. Again, before I stick it down, I'm going around the outside of the circle, but I love this card. It is so pretty. This one was another super basic one. I just fussy cut out the kind of sentiment, and then I was trying a whole bunch of these different patterns behind it, but they're all a little bit too busy. So I just grabbed some white cardstock and an embossing folder, and that's a new embossing folder I hadn't used before, but I really love it. It's kind of a brick texture. It's very hard to see on camera and in photos, but it is really lovely in person. I stuck that trimmed out piece and added some puffy hearts, so super simple. The thing with this project was I wasn't attempting to spend like a specific amount of time each day making these cards. Just my goal was just to make a card each day. So sometimes that took a long time and sometimes it took like 5 minutes. So I wasn't holding myself to any sort of time. This card, I wasn't really sure what I was kind of doing with it. I just picked out a couple of sentiments that I like and was working on stacking them. I decided this one I would stitch a kind of a pocket. I only stitched around 3 sides of that yay piece. But it wasn't, because I trimmed down the Oh Yeah card, it wasn't quite 3x4, so I ended up having to add another background to this as well. So this one I stuck all the way down. So the yay is a little pocket, but I don't actually end up sticking anything into it. Now what I should have done before I stuck this all together was trimmed the rounded corners off the bottom of this piece. This is one of the cards that I attempted to make square corners out of, but it looked a bit naff when you folded it up, flipped it over, sorry, and you can see the rounded corners. So I've just really roughly ripped that off, and I did manage to peel off the tape runner off the back of it. So through this project I haven't been really that concerned with what the backs of these cards look like, but because this is going on a tag flip rather than in a pocket page, I'm trying to be a little bit careful about making sure that the backs are as tidy as possible anyway. So this card here, I just added a couple more of those tiny word strips to it, and again some more sequins because I'm going to go sequin crazy this time. Most of my sets of cards that I've been doing have had at least one card that's fully sequined, so these ones I'm just not holding back with the sequins either. Now I knew almost exactly what I wanted to do when I saw this card. It looks like the front of a notebook, so that's exactly what I'm going to turn it into. I grabbed a few of these 4x6 cards, and they're from one of the Project Life sets. I can't remember what its name is, but they're not particularly thick cards, so I thought it would have worked well for this. I just folded them in half and then stitched them down the middle to create a little booklet. And then I'm using a lot of tape runner for this one and gluing that card onto the front of it, and then just using that as a guideline to trim around the edges. They didn't, the folded 4x6 piece didn't quite fit the same size, so I'm just trimming it down, and it makes a tiny little 3x4 notebook, which I super love. This is so cute. I just want to decorate the cover a little bit. I'm going to use the same tiny word strips. These are little Tim Holtz ones. So I'm just picking a sentiment. I'm going to trim that down so it fits into the label part in the middle. And it does kind of flap open a little bit, so I just grabbed a gold paper clip just to hold that shut and make it more like a card, but that's definitely one of my favorites from this week. This card seemed fairly obvious to me because it already sort of had a tag design in the middle of it, so I just trimmed off all of that background and used a hole punch to punch through the hole at the top and make it an actual tag. I've grabbed some gold trim just because gold seems to have shown up a lot in this set of cards anyway, and I'm just going to staple this onto the top. I just threaded it through one side. I'm still trying to keep it reasonably flat, so I've just threaded it through and stapled it front and back. Obviously though, this is now not a 3x4 card, so I'm grabbing another card. This was a 4x6 printable. I think I printed this out myself. It's a Brandy Kincaid design, so I just trimmed that down to 3x4 and stuck the tag on top. Now this is another one that I'm trying to get rid of the rounded corners, which seemed fairly easy for this card. I just trimmed off that white border, but again that makes it not 3x4, so I wanted to stick something onto the back of it to make it 3x4, but I decided to not to go with pattern paper, and I've grabbed a piece of transparency and I'm going to create a little shaker card as well on the back. So I've got these tiny little gold star sequins, so I'm just going to trap them between the front of the card and the transparency just with my sewing machine, which again didn't go through the sewing machine fairly well, but it does end up with quite a fun little shaker. I loved the frame design in this card, so I've just trimmed it down. I kept a little bit of the sort of background pattern that it's on, and then I grabbed my knife and a cutting mat and I'm just cutting out the inside. It says place photo here. I'm not going to place a photo there. I'm going to try and fit one of the other sentiments that I've got left into the window piece. One of the other things I thought about doing was just leaving it clear and maybe attaching 3 sides of it so you could slip a photo in behind it, but I really liked the idea of adding one of these sentiments, and a lot of them fit, but I really like this one. I'm pretty sure this is a Studio Calico card, but that looks to me like Ellie Edwards writing, so I'm not sure where it actually came from, but it does sort of just fit in the window, so I'm gluing that on, and then again I need to add some sort of backing to it to make it a 3x4 shape, and I trimmed down a 4x6. It's kind of a wood grainy looking card. I didn't want to stick that straight down onto it though, so I'm adding a little bit of foam behind it just to give it a tiny bit of dimension, otherwise they are all quite similar tones and would not stand out very well. So that was the 10 tags, and the rest of the tags that I've been doing throughout this project I put into pocket letters and sent them out to my patrons. This one here though, I did something a little different. I added to the 10. I had all of that stuff sitting on my desk. I needed to clear it out anyway, so I made a few extra bits and pieces. I'll walk you through it. It was very easy. Everything I have just either added an attacher, is that what you call them? An attacher to, or just punched holes in it and then stuck that all onto a binder ring. At the start of my little binder ring here, I've added a few charms and tassels, and that's about it. So this was the first card that I did, and again I just used an attacher. Where is it? Here it is. It's a metal die, but there are other ways to do this in here. This one is an old die from Studio Calico, so I doubt that that's still available. I'm sure there are other ones around, but like I said, I'll show you a few other ways to do this. I've added just a few bits and pieces in here, like tags that I had that sort of matched the color scheme. This was another one that I made, and again I've just punched a hole in it. Same with this one here. That's, you know, by far and away the easiest way to do things. Here is another one with again the same attacher, and I staple the attachers on. I've found that when I glue them on with like tape runner, they tend to fall off. So the staples or stitching are the best way to attach those. This was another one I made, and all I did was I pulled the tag back off so that I could hole punch the card behind it so that that just sits on there. Here's another really simple tag that I made. It's literally 2 of these cards stitched together with a little bit of crepe paper fringe down the bottom, so it just adds a little bit more height to it. You get that varied height through the tag flip, so that is a super easy way. You definitely don't even need to stitch this. You could have glued it, but the stitching just adds a little bit of texture. This is another one I made. That's another piece of transparency here, and I used a couple of the bits that I had cut off. Just used a border punch and stuck them back to back on both sides so that you end up with this transparent piece. Now here's another way to attach things at the top. I just die cut 2 circles glued them back to back, sandwiching half of the transparency, and then punched a hole through the top of it. So that's another easy way to make your own attacher. As is this, it's just a strip of gold glitter. It's kind of fabric, it's maybe gold glitter vinyl, and I just folded that in half and stitched it onto the top of the card and then punched a hole through it. So that's, again, that's the easiest way to make them. That's the same card that I made the other day with the gold star sort of shaker on the back of it. For the little notebooky cards, can you call it a card if it's actually a notebook? Let me see if I can get this out for you. Gotta find the end of my book ring here, which isn't gonna be easy for me. I just created a pocket out of a piece of page protector, just stitched around the edges. I made it loose enough for the little booklet to be able to fit in and out. And then I just made some reinforcing rings just by punching some circles with a hole in it, so that I can slip the little book in there and then pop that onto the binder ring. But you can still take the whole little booklet out and fill that up as a separate little mini book if you want to. Again, just adding a couple more little tags in here. These ones I did add tiny little embellishments to, another one of those stickers. This was just another card that I made from those leftover pieces. There's some of the half bits, I ended up ripping it, but I quite like the texture, and I just stuck it onto the back of a card so that I get the pattern on the reverse side. And then I trimmed down the sentiment piece off this, which I quite liked. Glued it all together and added some sequins. Here's another way to attach one of those cards that I made, which was just a little piece of the same trim. I've just looped it over and stitched it through the top. My little window shaker card just got that same attacher piece at the top, again stapled, not stitched. I love these little see-through elements. This is such a fun card and would be really cool in a Project Life album too. The plastic, it's just a piece of page protector, but it makes this really awesome window, just a few sequins in there. This was just a card, I didn't do anything to it except added another strip of that same fabric. I just glued it along the top, folded it over and punched a hole through it, and that's a really cute sparkly way to attach things. I made a little sequin sampler card, kind of looks a bit like those paint charts but with sequins. Oh my god, if I could paint my room with sequins, how good would that be? This is just a page protector, so it already had the holes at the top, and I've trimmed it down to fit. I stitched along the three sides, then separated it into rows, added my sequins, and then stitched the whole thing shut. So I used the tiny funnel that I have to poke in here to add the sequins, and that made it really, really easy. This is just a card that I just trimmed down. I trimmed the rounded corners off it just to give a different size onto the flip. But other than that, I did nothing apart from trim it and punch a hole. This was one of the cards that I had made, and I did just add a strip of paper, glued it on and punched a hole. And on the back there was a little pre-made sort of journaling spot, which of course now was round the wrong way because I trimmed it out. So I did add another sentiment that I trimmed out of another card, and I created a little envelope with a mini envelope die just to add a little bit of something to that. Again, these were two other, well, piece of card and a whole card that were sitting on the desk as well, and I've just created a pocket in here with the piece, so you could add whatever you wanted in here. And I've stitched it all the way around because on the back I added another journaling card, one of my gold foiled ones. So that's a really simple card to make. And the last one was just a vertical 4x6 card that I trimmed down and made it look a bit like a tag by trimming the corners off and adding another little punched reinforcing ring. Again, it's just a punched circle with a hole punched out of the middle of it. It's totally easy, you don't need a die or anything for that. And that's the whole tag flip. So I've totally enjoyed this project, and I love having the pocket letters and this to finish it off with. So I think I'm going to give this away because I don't need it. So if you would like a chance to win this tag flip, then I will leave a link down below in the description box where you can enter to win that, and I will send that out to a lucky winner. All the details will be down below. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you again very soon. Bye!